like define pop culture for me.
Okay. Pop culture is pretty much everything and anything that you can imagine. It's anything that's relevant at the moment. It can be discursive and generic. So you have, TV and the internet and magazines and advertisements and all of those things. It's what's relevant now, what's popular, what the masses are interested in. And it's a notoriously difficult term to define.
So, how is pop culture diverse?
It's diverse because it's so inclusive, right? I mean, there's something for everyone, and it's diverse too because you can't really opt out of it very easily. I mean, you can make very conscious decisions to not engage in certain aspects of popular culture. Like if you don't, I don't know. Let me think of an example. You might not buy into trends. You might not like trendy music or trendy fashion or something like that. But you live in a social world and it's everywhere, at least in the United States. So you can't just avoid it in its entirety. And it's diverse too because it changes so often. It's really transitory. So what's popular culture now is really different than what was popular culture in the 1940s. Although, as we've talked about in class, you see those things sort of become reinvented. And the best example, are like bell-bottom jeans or something like that, or countercultural movements like the hippie movement and tie-dyes and things like that you see from time to time make these kind of pop culture comebacks.
All right, so here we go. Lady Gaga.
All right.
Tell me your opinion on her, her whole persona, her music, everything about her. What do you think about her?
Well, first of all, I do like her. I would be lying if I said that the music was not on my iPod and that I wasn't interested, in her interviews with Anderson Cooper and her performances on MTV and all of that. And I don't think there's any denying, I don't know that there's like a statistic that backs this up, but that she's incredibly popular. I think she's like the best-selling female vocalist at the moment or pop artist at the moment. And she reminds me, of course, and I think other people have said this of Madonna, in the 80s. And I think, too, that she came at an interesting time. There was an opening, right? There was an opening for her after Britney Spears' fall from, grace, I suppose. And what's been interesting about Lady Gaga, and, students have been writing papers about her now for about 2 years in my classes. And everything from arguing, that her fans constitute a subculture, the little monsters, that they kind of live by a certain code or a way of kind of viewing the world. And I think that's interesting, the way that she's created this sort of, clan of devotees in a lot of ways. I think she's interesting from the perspective that she is political in her messages, right? And it's not, for instance, wearing a dress made of me, to make some kind of commentary on, the treatment of animals. Not everybody does that, I mean, people make these sorts of statements, but she wears it on her body, in a really sort of interesting way. And then, of course, she's become, for a lot of people, an icon in terms of, civil rights, gay rights, all of those things. So, I mean, I think that the cultural work she does from that regard is really, really interesting. And the fact that she's been so popular, and that if you like her, if you listen to her music, if you're a little monster or whatever, you have to encounter those issues. You don't have to agree with her, but I think she brings issues, to the forefront, things that you might not otherwise be thinking about, especially her younger audience members and stuff like that. So I think that makes her a little bit different, than other people who are out there now, and kind of useful to look at, because it's not as if she's right in all of her messages. It's not as if it's not complicated. She herself has described in interviews, I'm very deeply interested in these political issues. My songs might sound like gibberish, but there's really deep meanings behind them and all of those things. So I think that that's helpful and useful for us to at least talk about. It gets a dialogue going.
So what do you think she's really brought to pop culture? What do you think she's changed? What has she brought to diversity?
She sort of reinvented the wheel and stayed within the wheel in really interesting ways. Like, I think of Madonna in the 80s. She put out, might have been the early 90s, that book. It was like the sex book or something like that. And people were up in arms and sort of intrigued by the fact that she was depicting, interracial couples. Like, that was one of the things that Madonna did and was sort of very adamant about, and even her stage productions and things like that, putting black and white bodies together and kind of addressing that social taboo. And I think Lady Gaga has kind of done that in a way with gender and sexuality. And I don't know, you know, her song Born This Way, for example, you know, she pretty much argues, I think, there for this sort of acceptance, this tolerance. Is it an uncomplicated message? Is she oversimplifying things from, you know, maybe a more academic or intellectual standpoint? Probably, you know, but she's got millions of people singing the lyrics to these songs and like thinking about it. You know, maybe these people wouldn't have the same sort of like, you know, ideological position as her, but through this music they're able to sort of acknowledge this or start talking about it or something like that. I think that's interesting. In terms of gender, you know, she's an interesting case there too. You know, and she expresses it, you know, she uses her body as part of her performance art. Like, I don't think the woman is ever not on in terms of, you know, like, being, she's, you know, she says, every time I leave the house, like, that's a piece of art. Like, I use my body to do this. And I think that that's really interesting. Is it a lot different than what people like Madonna and even Britney Spears did? I don't know. But I think just her popularity is insane.